Welcome to Hamburger Business Review, Season 2, Episode 8. I'm your host, Mike Merrill.
And I'm your host, Zach Rose.
And I'm producer Chris Higgins. Today we're talking about money, specifically McDonald's money.
We're bringing in our guest Marcus Estes to explain money and culture. Let's get into it.
You guys can see one. I got one. Shoot it. Oh my God. Shut down. I thought it was a turkey. I swear to God. Call Marcus. And then who's Marcus? I know. I don't even know. Who the is Marcus?
That is from the original comedy sketch from the first Stella web shorts, where Michael Showalter shoots a man because he thought he was a turkey. Michael Ian Black says, "Oh my God, you shot Dan," and they all start to panic. And then David Wayne says quietly, "Call Marcus." And while the sketch goes on to ask, "Who's Marcus? Who the is Marcus?" The point is, we've called in our own Marcus.
So, I'm new here. I'm happy to call Marcus. I have called Marcus, but who's Marcus?
We last called on Marcus last year to understand hamburger hedging, the battle between Wendy's, McDonald's, and hedge funds. What he lacks in professional accolades or even a high school diploma, he more than makes up for in self-taught economic and cultural theory and bravado. Welcome back, Marcus.
Thanks, guys. I just want to say also, kicking off with the Stella clip is final confirmation that this is a Gen X podcast. It is great to be back. Should I give context on my background again?
I think we can just play the clip from last time you were on because you summed it up so well and not much has changed.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as I mentioned, I definitely don't have a traditional professional track record directly in finance. However, starting a long time ago in the year 2000, I took a job. I was living in Athens, Georgia. I took a job with technically a sort of financial services firm called Elliott Wave International. It's like a company that publishes these very 80s style financial newsletters that attempt to predict market prices. And this one was notable because it had this very charismatic guru at the helm, this guy that kind of uncovered a non-traditional manner of trying to predict prices that involved patterns in mass psychological behavior and cultural analysis and stuff. So basically, for several years as a young man, I was paid to write columns and got a chance to go pretty deep on a lot of market mechanics and understand them. And then I found I kind of liked it and enjoyed it, and I've always been that way. So not like a heavy trader type, but rather sort of someone that enjoys stepping back and observing this stuff as a cultural phenomenon. Hopefully I can help unpack this particular report, which I found interesting.
Okay, that makes sense. So where are we heading today, guys?
The reason that we wanted to talk to you, Marcus, is that we want to better understand McDonald's by looking at the share price and the financial documents that they file. Our belief is that McDonald's is this lens where you can pretty much look on anything in society through McDonald's. And so the question that we have is, what are the financials telling us?
And how do I even read a 10K?
And what's a 10K? Is there a 9K or an 11K?
So guys, this is, first a caveat here. You've pulled in the most untraditional financial analyst that you possibly could have to discuss these things, because my answer to this question about what the financials of a company can tell us about the company is probably kind of unorthodox. I would take less consideration about the meat and potatoes financial statements and much, much more consideration about broader cultural things about the company. This all goes back to some of my early training in the, witchcraft-driven technical analysis that would actually see that you should ignore revenues and merely look at price. But with all that aside, I actually think reading 10Ks is very fun and interesting behavior. You can extract a lot of sort of non-traditional stuff out of it. And so, yeah, I think we should actually look at the McDonald's 10K. I'd be happy to, but I think there's also some bigger picture stuff that would be more fun to get into.
Right on. I think one thing that, just to situate us in time, right now we're recording on, December 19th, 2024. Is this financial advice? Should people do things based on what we say?
I think we're operating under the classic do your own research caveat.
I mean, it's a fancy thing to say that, boilerplate, this is not financial advice. That makes you sound smart.
I mean,
this is not financial advice.
This is not financial advice.
That sounded really smart. Let's keep it in.
Dear God, this is not financial advice. I think what we're trying to do is, this is like the bones in the chicken blood that we're throwing down. We're trying to understand, what does this say about McDonald's and the rest of the world, not what trading strategy are we going to use.
Well, I don't practice Santeria, and I ain't got no crystal ball, but I'm sure there's a great way to land this. That's all that's on.
So what does the stock price and its movement tell us about McDonald's?
It tells you, first off, what people are willing to pay for it. And then beyond that, the topic of what price means and how society arrives at stock price is wildly complicated and divisive, actually. Traditionally, we think of things like DCF. That's some standard models that other professional people use to tell other people about what they think the price should be. That's discounted future cash flows. In other words, okay, let's figure out how much money we think it's going to be making in the future, and then basically come up with a way of discounting that amount by virtue of money becoming more valuable as it moves through time. Money now is worth more than money later. That's a cool, frankly, kind of arcane thing, but that's a standard method. The point is that a lot of these things would treat this as a completely rational, it's an algorithm, it's a calculation. And, of course, let me say the obvious, markets are not rational. They're not, right? So the question is, what is it that drives people to believe things about a company and what the company may do in the future? And, a lot of those things are very traditional Wall Street analysts poring over the numbers. Now we've got algorithms and bots. And we've also got retail investors and coin kids and meme kids that have their own take. And I like to factor in the more behavioral subjective stuff, the better for my taste. And I also think that's where we're going as a culture.
So I found some factoids today that were interesting on simplywall.st, Simply Wall Street website. And one of those was that 75 or 70 thereabouts % of stock in McDonald's is owned by institutional investors. And I think it's like 20 something institutions.
Oh.
You'd think that all of those institutions would be hyper rational. Does that imply a sort of meme resistance, meme immunity to the McDonald's stock?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the stock market is, of course, held institutionally. I think that ratio is probably pretty bog standard, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, it's pretty fascinating how much of it, even a quarter, could be held by individual, quote, retail traders. So first off, yes, I kind of think that the institutional investors are less swayed by Reddit. And yet, some of these kind of conflicts are between institutional capital and retail investors that have been the subject of so much major motion picture, et cetera, around the GameStop, shows that if these retail accounts band together and sort of engage in swarm behavior, they actually can have some influence upon the institutional consideration. But I think the major point here is also that the true subjects of the meme culture are not just the investors. Obviously, it's the consumers. So McDonald's as a meme is very impactful for the people that are buying burgers, I think.
And you're saying that sort of feeds back in earnings and traditional metrics?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about then McDonald's as meme, as the conceptual idea of McDonald's as it's sitting out there in the minds of the consumer, which is then being observed by the minds of the investor to watch to see what will happen with that price. For me, I track the McDonald's price. I have it on my watch and I watch it go up and down. And I will...
Wait a minute. Tell me more, but hang on. It's on your watch.
All day at the hamburger restaurant, I'm watching the price go up and down.
How big? Is it most of the watch face or like...
It's like half. It's like half the watch face, yeah.
Good choice.
I'm watching the number go, up and down. One time I watched the price go way down. And I was like, oh, what happened? Mm-hmm. And that was the E. coli. I saw the stock first before I saw the news of the E. coli outbreak. And then I've also seen in other companies where you see the news first and then you can react to that news. I guess I'm just wondering, Marcus, that relationship between those two things seems very close. And yet, are we to assume that the impact on the share price is real? In the sense that the amount of loss in the share price, should that equal roughly the cost of the E. coli outbreak?
That's also a really good question. Mike, let me see if I can frame this in the way that I would love to answer it. And I think it's what you were saying. The point is, when we look at the E. coli thing, should we be thinking about how many fewer people will be buying burgers? And thus, based on that decline in revenue, how will that affect share price? Is that sort of the...
Right. And I guess In my mind, I think about it in a much more complicated way of, does the drop in the share price as it equates to the overall value of the company, does that drop and that like subtraction of value, is that a pretty good indication of the impact, the value impact of that bad news over time? Or
I see. In other
you?
words, E. coli scare hits, stock price drops. Does that mean that we've actually eroded the value of McDonald's, and you can measure it by virtue of the stock price?
And eventually we will see the impact of E. coli in either lost sales or lawsuits or whatever it is, and those two numbers will be approximately the same.
Interesting. Here's the way I would kind of go about this answer. It's management's own analysis of the value of McDonald's. We will actually read this briefly in the 10K. So McDonald's is, of course, a giant supply chain operation. It is a real estate company that you guys have covered well previously.
Mm-hmm.
Above all else, it's a brand. The word brand is such a funny thing. Like, we all know what it means, and yet it's also one of those things when you inspect it, it's like, well, what does that mean? It means, on some level, the collective idea that we all have in our minds about what this thing is. And so it's a very, nebulous thing. That's, of course, why ad agencies are such powerful creatures. They're sort of these wizards that can influence this thing in a way that's non-deterministic. Like, I think what would be really interesting here for a second is for us to like jump into this. Like, what is the McDonald's brand? First off, what McDonald's presents to us through its advertising, I would argue is not actually a perfect match by any means by like what we all know it to be, right? So McDonald's is such a massive brand. It reminds me of just like Coca-Cola in the 90s. It's just, it becomes this very kind of bland, frankly, like just sort of like, we're going to get a ditty. Is the current slogan, I'm loving it? You guys correct me on that. Are we still in the I'm loving it phase? So that's perfect.
Yeah, we are.
So like, we da 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 da, and it says something like super, just like, I love this burger. It doesn't try to tell us like what kind of burger this is. It's just riding on this idea, this broad idea.
Doesn't even say burger. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's just so abstract, right? Here, but let's dive in for a second. So I have been, certainly because of this show, guys, for all of y'all's interest in McDonald's. I don't spend that much time thinking about McDonald's, and yet McDonald's has been coming at me through every direction and making me feel crazy, obviously, because is it just because of you guys that I'm paying attention to it? No. And the thing is that, so it's caused me to do a lot of thinking about this. And, here's a couple things that have come to mind, all right? I was watching the Bill Maher show, God help me, and McDonald's came up, and he was like, I had a burger, and it was pretty good. And he had this woman, this well-educated member of the professional managerial class. She was like, oh my God, McDonald's? How could you have allowed yourself to enjoy that? And I like texted Mike right away. It just kind of blew my mind. I was like, yes, there's something. McDonald's is not broadly loved, right? It's considered dirty. It is abject to some aspects, massive aspects of our society, right? It is a base, lower, I would say, populist phenomenon, right? And so the idea is that regardless of whether you might like the taste of McDonald's or not, some classes of society are meant to reject McDonald's. And so now McDonald's advertising, of course, purports to be this sort of global for everyone brand, but I think that we should sort of pick apart, well, who is it really for? Who is the core McDonald's consumer? Who loves it? And by doing that, we might sort of analyze, is that tradition on the upswing or not? Thoughts, Mike? I mean, I'm curious.
The idea of everyone is really interesting because McDonald's for everyone is true if you consider everyone that McDonald's can reach through advertising.
I sent my dad to sort of my childhood McDonald's because they'd had a remodel, and I wanted his impression. And the first thing he noticed was that there's no more kid stuff, and it's no more families. It's just hungry young men eating lots of burgers. And so I think with the app, I think that's kind of what McDonald's has become now. I think they can't market to children for legal reasons or for there's too much liability in that. And I think it's just kind of become, in a very broad sense, it's the children of McDonald's grown up.
Wow, that's a fascinating take. Of course, the thing that I go to here, and I'm going to get, you will all groan out loud, but it was a latent, powerful symbol for really presidential politics. I mean, and this goes back, right? I went back and watched some old SNL clips of Phil Hartman playing Bill Clinton at a McDonald's restaurant. It's a great clip. He's just going around eating everybody's food, right?
How are you? Oh, that's an adorable baby. What's your name, sweetheart?
Her name is Shakira.
Shakira. That means African princess, doesn't it?
Oh, why, yes.
Well, she certainly is beautiful enough to be a princess. Say, you gonna finish these fries?
No. You want some?
Well, if you're not gonna eat them. Those are good. Well, Shakira, you take good care of your mom now. Hi, how are you? Hello, good to meet you. How you doing? Hi.
We'll drop in a second of that here because that is so powerful. It's like poignant now.
Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, right? And he was, he's a fancy guy, but he absolutely cut through that kind of almost secretive belonging to, again, professional managerial elite classes, and signaled his everyman status by virtue of his. And here's the thing: it was for him. It wasn't like this kind of shining, like I love McDonald's. It was rather that he's got to have it. He's weak for it, right? He's jogging.
Yeah, it was addiction.
But it was almost
energy,
like,
for sure.
he was exactly addiction energy. And the thing is like we all saw Bill, cramming those Big Macs and thought, man, I get you, man. And that, so now fast forward, okay, this goes back to the question of like how to analyze the value of McDonald's. I think one of the most fascinating things about it is that, what is it? It's supposed to be cheap food, right? Because it's just supply chain efficiency to the extreme. At least I remember thinking of it as, just like you can get something off of that menu for just a shockingly little amount of money, and it's technically food. And of course, this is why, I don't know if you guys have done any demographic analysis of the customer base, but I would assume that, it is disproportionately attended by lower income people, right? Well, now we've had this. Oh yeah, I'll pause there. I'm curious. Is that an assumption? Is that a wrong assumption?
I'm not sure.
In my experience at the hamburger restaurant, I would say it is not true. And my restaurant is obviously at a very specific location as well. But I would say I am shocked at the breadth of people that come to a hamburger restaurant. And I would say it is everyone.
I would frankly love to dig in on that topic.
But that's one instance, again.
Anecdata.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm curious with Zach. Are you coming to that from your recent experience visiting, dozens of restaurants in one day? Is that where you think of it, or is there other data?
So today is one of my quarterly days where I eat McDonald's. Monday was shareholder dividend day, but I held it off for today. And I had a bowl of oatmeal there today for $4.50. That was just soupy oatmeal. It seems expensive.
Right. That's like 8 cents of product, right?
Yeah. It seems high margin. I'll say that.
Well, this is really where I was going to go with this, is that, of course, one of the bigger mimetic elements of McDonald's has been its role in the inflation story, right? So we talk about Big Macs and the pricing of the Big Mac index, right?
I feel like the entire first half of the year was politics around McDonald's. It was McDonald's and politics, and then it was inflation, and the cost of burgers is too damn high. Everything was being hit on that until the E. coli situation, and then that story kind of got pushed away for a little while.
There's so much inside of this. I mean, so briefly, it's like we use the Big Mac index as theoretically a more reliable, simplified form of the consumer price index, because there are a lot of tricky games played with those larger sets of numbers. The Biden administration spent a long time saying, actually, the inflation's not that bad. And of course, this was just a classic case of doublespeak, because everyone knows it's bad. It feels bad out here, right? And of course, the simplest rejoinder is look at the frickin' Big Mac, right? If I don't know exactly what it costs today, but it is no longer cheap. And, again, when I would say, okay, well, what is the brand of McDonald's, right? Again, and how do we use that to possibly make a financial prediction about McDonald's? Well, if it was simply cheap food, it wouldn't be very, I'd say there's a demand curve there, and say, well, if it gets expensive, people will stop buying it because it's cheap. Didn't happen, did it? Read the 10K. They have been able to basically keep pace with inflation, raise prices, preserve margins. People keep buying the burgers. And I find that fascinating. If McDonald's business model is in fact inflation resistance, if they can raise the prices of burgers and people still want it, I think we have a bunch more questions to ask about what McDonald's is fundamentally.
And by the way, right now, mid-year 2024, the Big Mac index was $5.29 in the US. Compare that 5 years earlier to $4.39. So a 5-year increase of 20% or thereabouts.
We've also done case studies where we've seen that the hamburger is the lowest margin item on the menu.
Uh-huh.
I'd be interested in knowing if the fries are getting more expensive.
The online discourse and anger right now is really targeted at the hash brown. The hash brown is $2.99.
Wow.
Oh, that seems high. That feels really high.
Yeah, and right now there's a deal at McDonald's, a 2 for $6 deal for the sausage egg McMuffin. So you're looking at the same one hash brown, the same as one sandwich. Is mentally how the consumer looks at it, even though it's a special deal, it's designed as this promotion, all these kind of things.
You know what I would really love is someone to really, just reduce the entire debate around inflation to the McDonald's menu and the marginal value of it. In other words, like how much money they're making off of each item. There's a huge ideological complex here because, again, we just went through, a presidency where we experienced rampant inflation. I mean, just it felt sense of, gosh, life is really hard all of a sudden. And the message from the administration was not, we hear you, we see you, we'll make it better. Here's the exact things that we plan to do. But rather, actually, it's not that bad. And also corporate greed.
Right, because during that entire time, you can look back and see McDonald's share price going up.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot to be said there. Were we actually just experiencing collusion and in other words, like kind of price fixing? It's possible that we have a market that has become so consolidated that we have a few number of corporations able to basically meet in a back room and say, hey, man, the price of burgers is going up. Why? Because we have a narrative of inflation. All of a sudden, we can just do it. Is that what happened? It's really complicated, but I would actually love to know, first off, we do because these are publicly traded companies. If we were seeing massively increased profit margins, that would be the sign of collusion and, frankly, corporate, manipulation. Because in theory, they're not supposed to be able to do that. If McDonald's raises their prices, Burger King takes market share. But if they all raise their prices together, oh well, that's just, the economy.
But that's where the value of the brand comes back too. Is I see people come into my hamburger restaurant that I don't think would ever go to another brand. I think there are people that are so brand loyal. I mean, this goes back to even in high school when I worked at McDonald's. There was two groups of kids, right? There was people that went to McDonald's and people that went to Burger King. Like, I think those brand loyalties, like, you're getting into like Nike, Adidas territory.
I want to understand that. Like, do you have a sense of why that would be? Is it the product itself? Is it the cachet of the story around the product? Is it how the store feels? Is it what it means about me that I wear the clothes or go to this? What is it?
I mean, ask yourself about why you care about any brand, that those are hard questions to answer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a association with Nike that I developed over the, 10 plus years. How long was I there? 20? I don't know. The long time that I lived in Portland, Oregon. Mm-hmm. Like, I've developed an association with that brand that makes me like them more than Adidas. And I think early childhood stuff for McDonald's was a huge part of that brand, which is like what Zach was saying. They are currently weaponizing nostalgia against us in terms of things like the Grimace Shake and bringing back, sort of hinting at some of these characters that are not officially really part of McDonald's anymore if you go into any McDonald's.
That is, by the way, I think what's weirdest to me about the current McDonald's situation is that all of the things that I can name or think of culturally about it from my childhood and my run, if you actually go to the store today, like literally none of it exists at all.
No play place.
Yeah, it doesn't resemble the other stuff. And yet it feels like it's riding on that. That nostalgic sense is still driving my belief set around what the store is. But what the store really is kind of gray. Like, it's this desaturated, technologically mediated, unfun place to purchase, food.
Yeah, this has got to be it'll historically be considered a huge mistake. I see. Here's the thing. What it
You're
smacks
talking
up
about
to
the
me,
rebrand to the new Square store and everything being
the gray, corpo LinkedIn McDonald's. There's the bottom up version of the brand that I was discussing earlier, right? What it secretly means, like as a symbol that could be activated by a populist president. And then there's like what it thinks it means. And on that end, it just seems incredibly crazy to try to turn McDonald's into some kind of like sleek, globo homo thing, right? And again, I kind of see it as like this.
Is that global homogenization?
Yeah. Universal homosexuality is what I'm saying. No, I meant global homogenization. Yes, exactly. So I think that this is a really good essay on that newsletter, Blackbird Spy Plane, that like basically we've gone through such an era of everything getting slickened down into these like simple modernist kind of presentations, muted, desaturated colors, that what seems really cool all of a sudden is like a return to just like second wave coffee shop, like funky couches and stuff.
Well, and you see that in the advertising, which I guess you would say is the sort of the leading edge of McDonald's is brand, in the sense that, right now it's Wyden and Kennedy has the account and they're pushing a pretty culturally aggressive agenda with McDonald's. Again, it's streamers, it's anime, it's all of these things that are really designed to hit these like niche, cool connections, which is the opposite of what a physical McDonald's feels like right now.
So they're out of sync. The spend on brand is out of sync with the actual like experience of walking in one right now. Is that your take?
Yeah, I think that you can move faster in a media sense than you can in a physical infrastructure sense. And I think that, like you were saying, Marcus, I think it was a mistake. They're going to realize it was a mistake to have destroyed the rich cultural history of McDonald's. And they basically neutered every one of those locations. Like they've stripped any sort of sense of the culture out of the physical store, yet they've dialed it way up on the brand and media side, that they're pushing out all of this pretty wild cultural stuff.
I think McDonald's is succeeding in spite of itself. I think that it's this idea, this gray modernism. Zach, your take that like it's actually just the core being young men that grew up on it, have a sentimental attachment. It's so funny because like the last thing they want to do is like to walk into like this sort of fantasy of an adult.
Yeah, like a nostalgia corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, producer Chris is going to parachute into the middle of this discussion and say, let's steer it back to the financial analysis, because I still don't fully understand like what we're talking about and what do finances have to do specifically with McDonald's.
I guess, Marcus, my question would be, what would have to happen in a sort of brand meme cultural sense for a financial analyst to upgrade their take or downgrade their take on McDonald's? Like what could McDonald's do in that realm, in that cultural brand realm, in order to impact what someone who's just thinking about the numbers might consider?
Well, so it depends on the analyst, right? So, I mean, if the analyst is just poring over the the financial statements, frankly, the current management guidance, they're going to accelerate the arches, and it's kind of a boring answer. But if the analyst is taking into consideration this kind of broader conversation about the brand, like, well, what does it mean? Like, what would it mean to have a bunch more loyal McDonald's customers? My take is this: like, I think we have to acknowledge that the media brand of McDonald's doesn't match the populist bottom up version of it. Best thing a brand can do, in my take right now, in from henceforth, like in our society, is at minimum dog whistle to your actual base. Right now, it's tricky to do this because basically what you have is subcultures, and when you have a huge brand, you can't just like completely join a subculture, right? You don't want McDonald's to become, for instance, a Republican burger restaurant, right? That's not a good move. However, because I think the analysis here of it's not just Trump embracing it, it's just I'm saying that there is a groundswell populist identification that is basically kind of fighting this idea of it as an abject, immoral, there's a kind of a slight class war thing, I think, baked inside of it.
We found a sponsor, and It's a database company? What, you might ask, does a database company have to do with burgers? Well, actually, maybe everything. If you're interested in supply chain transparency or conflict-free replicated data types, visit fireproof.storage. We'll be talking about them more next week and looking at how Fireproof could make the whole fast food industry better. Stay tuned for that next week and check them out at fireproof.storage.
Here we are back from commercial. We've got the McDonald's Form 10K pulled up on all of our computers. We're skimming through this. It's a very large document. It is an annual report. Is that correct, Marcus?
That's right. That's right. They are required by law to do this once a year.
And if you're an investor, you pull this up, you're not a, Elliott Wave investor, you're a simple investor or a, financially based investor. You're pulling this up. What are you looking for?
They call this the fundamental approach. And the fundamentals of the 10K, I would say, in roughly this order, top to bottom. It's a long document, right? So you can either sign up for, I'm going to read every single word in this thing. Probably a lot of boilerplate. So here's some highlights. Start with a business overview. This is narrative. It's probably the most fun thing to read because it is, management's attempt to first, just say, this is what we think this business is.
And that's a description of the business about McDonald's.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you'll see there in this case, it's not entirely obvious. You actually see some judgments, about like, hey, this is the way we see it, right? Then the risk factors is especially fun. Here's the thing about the risk factors. You might think, so this is all the negative stuff, obviously. Here's what we think is risky to the business. You would say, well, hold on. If this document is meant to persuade me to buy the stock, what is their motivation to even tell me about all the bad stuff? Well, here's the answer. It's very much a kind of a, think of it, a legal game, right? So everything around finance is girded by litigation and legal conflict. So the Matt Levine newsletter is mostly a series of weird lawsuits and stuff, right? And this is what's so fun about it. Risk factors, if you buy a stock and you think, gosh, that was risky and the company didn't tell me about it, they should have. That has been the essence of so many massive lawsuits. So over time, this 10K is really the holder of record. It's kind of like a keeper of trauma on some level. This is a chance for the company to be like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and state everything I could possibly state that anyone could later accuse me of not telling them. So it's very extensive.
It's interesting also that everything that comes up in the risk section seems like there's been a case study for sale at the Harvard Business Review case studies, and we've talked about it here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. And I'm curious, like chicken or the egg. Anyway, so get through all the negative stuff and understand the lens by which to read that as well. Then the selected financial data here. So this includes part of what they might say the MD&A, management's discussion analysis. This is fun because it's like the narrative part of the finances. So what does management think about the hard numbers, right? And so there's quite a lot of, you can make a lot of different narratives out of the numbers. And this is their take to sort of spin it in a way that is going to be sort of like a pitch, to you. Things that you'd be looking to see there is like, how does management see the growth trends, right? So stocks must grow. Companies must grow in order for the stock to appreciate in value. So what are revenues and earnings? Are they trending up or down or flat, et cetera? What do their margins look like? You want to see positive cash flow, this kind of thing. And then from there, you can actually dive into the financial statements themselves. And, if you're not like an accountant or a finance person, at first it might seem like gobbledygook, but it's not really that crazy to kind of quickly teach yourself like how to make sense of this stuff. And I do recommend that people do this. Frankly, if you run a small business, your version of this is not so different. We won't go into crazy detail here, but I'll just keep it really high level. So you're basically looking to, there's like kind of, I guess, three big pieces of it. You're going to look at the income statement, which is just literally, profit and loss. So they might say P&L. And then the balance sheet, that shows like how much money do you have in the account. And that includes assets and liabilities and equity. And then, basically at the end of the day, the cash flow is the actual cash that's entering and leaving the business. The way to kind of tear this stuff apart is you want to see, essentially balance sheet strength. Like what can hurt a company is, are they managing their cash? Do they have cash on hand? Are they profitable? Are they net profitable? Is there enough cash entering the business to keep the lights on? Obviously, this is really deep and complex stuff. Publicly traded companies have all sorts of complicated mechanisms by which they can affect this, issuance of shares and bonds, et cetera, fundraising mechanisms. At the end of the day, like again, looking at all this, looking at the financial statements, you'll have read what management thinks about them and have some sense of it. This would be your chance to have any different opinion, right? So McDonald's is, of course, looking at this, a quite healthy, well-managed corporation. They're doing great. their own analysis of their own record here seems pretty dead on. A lot of times going this far in the weeds on a 10K, you'd be looking at companies that maybe aren't doing so great. And, you might see management's analysis being rosy and optimistic, but you might think, my God, they're sitting on quite a lot of debt there. And how do we know for sure that that line of revenue is going to continue to pay for it? So you're looking for things that, and again, what might I be able to read that other people can't read? The final thing that you want to read is legal proceedings. It's important. The company has to state them if they are considered, material. And sometimes you'll have bombshells, that are tucked away in there, and you wouldn't want to not have read them. McDonald's is so huge that they have a tremendous amount of legal proceedings happening at all time. We talked a little bit about the E. coli stuff. There's always class action stuff. I didn't see anything in here that made me think that there was going to be some huge gotcha on that line item, but just do remember to check it out.
So these legal proceedings, they include sections like franchising, suppliers, employees, and they're, I think, briefly describing the people they're having legal conflicts with, and in a very high level way, the nature of those conflicts. So for franchising, it's broad range of subjects, including but not limited to quality, service, cleanliness, menu pricing, alleged discrimination, delinquent payments of rents and fees, franchise grants, renewals, and terminations. Those are hints of all the lawsuits McDonald's is having.
Yeah, what's funny is a smaller, startups have to do this even when they're not publicly traded, right? It's material if you're raising money. Actually, I had to go through this myself as a startup operator. Hey, might as well, I need to disclose, we've got some lawsuits. Smaller companies, you can just kind of detail exactly what they are. Here that
they've got lawsuits with everyone.
Yeah, so it's just categories of lawsuits. Here's broadly speaking, there's a bunch of them. I guess it's not a strict regulatory requirement to enumerate them, as long as that they're contained conceptually in the categories. Really funny. God knows what it'd be like to work in the McDonald's legal department. My God,
it must be huge looking at this list of all the people suing them.
Yeah.
Just from what you were saying, though, it does make me want to go back and read the 2022 10K, because that was a year where a lot of their numbers were down. And so presumably the narrative couldn't be as rosy when the numbers are lower. How do they spin that would be an interesting thing to see. So I do think there's something of looking at this stuff year over year over year versus just taking a snapshot that you're bringing up that I think is super interesting.
It's also, I think, noteworthy to characterize the size of this document. This is a little over 40,000 words. That's like a short novel, essentially. And this is not written as a novel, obviously. But it's such a wall of content. I find myself searching for keywords.
Yeah.
Things that we've covered on the show, like India, where does that come up?
Hopefully my little bullet points there, it's a guide to skimming the thing, right? So, on one hand, this thing it's a regulatory document, right? And it's formatted in this gross way because of the government system that you have to use to upload it. It's literally like a regulated HTML document with XML files behind it and all this hilarious stuff. Analysts are supposed to read it. Normal people don't do this. The people that are listening to this podcast that care about it are not normal. And if you wanted to try cracking into it and just pulling out the little fun bits, you could probably spend 20 minutes and do this for a different company and actually, learn something about it. And I encourage this. I think that on one hand, it's it belongs in the realm of this more traditional financial analysis that I don't know is super useful, but from just a citizen's perspective of it's information I can go get myself and then know something, how to investigate something. It's a pretty useful skill to have. Here's what I want to say in summary is that finance is super boring. It seems super, super boring. I don't know how many people were stirred by our summary enough to go crack into it themselves. I would just want to say finance is actually super interesting. It's about more than it seems to be. It's not about the numbers. Finance is it is in fact about human behavior and culture. I encourage curiosity about finance. It's one reason I really love this show. You guys are doing a thing here where you are making this stuff more interesting and tenable and acceptable to people that may not even have an interest in investing in it, but just thinking and caring about it. So I hope that this has been on one hand, getting into even deeper into the weeds that people not care about. But I hope we've kind of demonstrated that those particular weeds are not the only important part of the forest to go explore.
And stay tuned. We'll be announcing our full day of live day trading soon.
Dude, that's such a good idea. Such a good idea. I'm not using my money.
This is such a good idea that I'm going to go so far away from, and y'all can just do it without me. It'd be great.
Chris, we'll send you a 24-hour tape to edit.
I'll just be pitching rocks. Hamburger Business Review is an independent production. You can become a supporter at hamburgerbusinessreview.com. You can also buy some merch there, leave a comment, make suggestions, and sign up for our email newsletter with way more detail about every episode. That is hamburgerbusinessreview.com.
Do you have stories or theories or insights into McDonald's? Because we'd love to hear them. Email us an audio note at operations@hamburgerbusinessreview.com, and we will definitely listen and might even play it on the podcast and discuss. Also, please rate and review the show, preferably using some kind of elaborate burger analogy like Chris is the bun, Zach is the meat, I'm the cheese, maybe Marcus is the pickles. Have fun with it. I'm Mike Merrill.
I'm Zach Rose.
And I'm Chris Higgins. Our theme music is from Jonna Bechtolt's Jazz Around. Our social media manager is Colette Wacker. And our graphic designer is Chris Knapp. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
I'm sorry, I gotta go feed the dog.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Clearly.
Let's pause. Let's pause for a second.